Good to see all of you again, and I hope you enjoyed the beginning session with Kai-Fu Lee. And let me just start out with an introduction here that obviously we're seeing an environment now where China has shifted its focus more and more from manufacturing to a huge focus on technology, on AI, and a variety of other areas. And that has shifted a lot of where innovation is occurring and other areas of development. Now, we've got a great session coming up here with Christine Loh. Christine Loh is a visiting professor at UCLA Anderson. She teaches a course on non-market risks. She's a former deputy minister for the environment in the Hong Kong SAR government. And her direct responsibilities there included air quality, energy, climate change, and biodiversity. She serves as a chief development strategist at the Institute for the Environment at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and advises HSBC on climate change and BASF on sustainability. Now, she'll be speaking to Jeongmin Seong, who's a Shanghai-based partner at McKinsey Global Institute, and Guangdong-based Joe Rocha, who's the governor of the American Chamber of Commerce South China, about their insights and observations about the region, about the innovation that is occurring. As before, we'll have time for audience Q&A. Please fill in your questions at the bottom of the screen where you'll see a Slido tool. And please now join me in welcoming Professor Christine Loh.
Hi, good day, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I have the privilege of moderating this session. And thank you, Terry, for already doing the introduction to my two guests. So this gives me a chance to dive straight into the topic. Thank you to Dr. Kai-Fu Lee for giving us really a very big picture of the situation in China today. What we will do in this particular session is perhaps pick up on some of the issues of how China became what she is today, which is not only a giant factory of the world, but China today is driving forward on a technological transformation that is quite amazing. As Terry said, we have actually two people who are on the ground in China who can share additional perspectives with us beyond what Dr. Kai-Fu Lee had time for. And Jeongmin, he's based in Shanghai and he's done tremendous work, research work. He looks at long-term trends, economic development, manpower development. So I think these are probably some of the issues we want to get into. And Joe Rocha, he's with a company, a joint venture in Guangdong. He's also the governor of the American Chamber of Commerce in South China. So I think another perspective is how on the ground in Guangdong, and you just saw a picture of Shenzhen. I remember those days when I was younger, what Shenzhen was and what it is today, which is tremendous. But on the ground, I think Joe can share with us what people who are doing business on the ground in southern China, what they think of working and investing in southern China and what life is like. So perhaps I can really dive straight in because Kai-Fu Lee has already painted a tremendous picture of China's advancement. So my first question really is, China is an industrial economy that is now shifting into a technological economy. It is still going to make a lot of things. In many ways, it is still making T-shirts, but not as much as it used to, but it's making drones, it is making vaccines, and it is now making a whole slew of products driven by big data, AI, and all these things that Kai-Fu Lee has been talking to us about. Kai-Fu also said that, and I think he's famous for pointing this out, data is the new oil, and China is not only the new Saudi Arabia, it is the new OPEC. Because it has data, it is working with data, and it has made tremendous advancement. He did point out that China, where China still has gap to fill, and I think he didn't have time to go too much into that. So perhaps Jeongmin and Joe might have time to go a little bit into that. So Jeongmin, maybe I can start with you. What is the situation on the ground today? in China? And how did China really make this leap in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you, Terry and Christine, for this wonderful opportunity. So the earlier session focused a lot more on AI and data. And why don't I take a step back and take a broader view in terms of how to think about different types of innovation happening in China. And we defined 4 different types of innovation. China is already very strong in 2 of them, and China is still catching up in the other 2. So, and let me talk through one by one. So the first type of innovation is called science-based innovation. And this is close to our conventional view on the innovation and research. And in order to do this, you need lots of smart PhDs and then let them drive long-term fundamental research to find out breakthroughs and new inventions. So for example, semiconductor industry, pharmaceutical industry will be a good example of this. And in this space, China still does not have globally competitive companies yet. So there are some gaps. So that's the first type of innovation. Second type of innovation is called engineering-based innovation. So this is about integrating the latest and greatest technology from suppliers or other tech partners, and then put them on your own platform. And the key here is to accumulate generations of engineering know-how. Right? So for example, automotive sector or aviation sector will be a good example of this type of innovation. And China so far has been showing a mixed result. For example, in high-speed rail, where government can create a big market and tech transfer happen to the other local players, China is doing very well. But in other areas where the barrier is relatively high, so for example, aviation, China is still catching up. So that's the second type of innovation. Third type of innovation is called customer-focused innovation, and this is less about R&D, but more about speed. The key here is to identify customer pain points and quickly introduce new products, services, and business models. So for example, in internet sectors or consumer electronics sectors. And here, there has been lots and lots of innovation out of China, whether that's e-commerce or social commerce, digital payment, smartphone, you name it, right? So China is using its scale and market advantage to do lots and lots of innovation. So China is doing very well. The fourth type of innovation is called efficiency-driven innovation. This is about process innovation, how to cut costs, reduce time, improve quality. And you see a lot of this in traditional manufacturing sector, and China is again, doing very well. That is because China has built a vast manufacturing ecosystem, as we have seen from the video, especially in Greater Bay Area. So, and which cannot be easily replicated by other low-cost countries in a short period of time. Therefore, if you look at solar panel industry, for example, 9 out of 10 global players are from China. 7 out of 10 consumer drone makers are also from China. So, again, China is doing very well. So there was a broader view in terms of how to think about 4 different types of innovation in China and my observation on the ground.
Jeongmin, thank you very much. Joe, perhaps I can ask you the same question, in terms of how you see the situation on the ground at the co-front in Guangdong province itself.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Thank you, Terry. It's great to see you guys and speak with the students again and everyone that's attending today. So I think that in Guangdong, we have a very dynamic situation with the Greater Bay of incorporating all of the 7+3 special administrative zones that we have, including, if you wanted to, the Hainan region. But we see a very big shift from the original foreign investment to China technology. And so it's clearly stated in the new 14th 5-year plan of this policy of independence from industrial countries and economies to China taking a role, not only in those areas of manufacturing, but also in high technology. So there's a very big sense to promote a self-reliance strategy that includes securing supply chains in China, both from a local standpoint and to continue as a supply chain for the global supplier of resources. So essentially to have an independent China, but still have the global economies largely dependent on the Chinese supply chain. And this is in line with, I guess, the 3 benchmarks that they had stated previously as far as just breaking down the strategy of the overall technological advances of China. So in 2020, just to keep pace with these current technologies, and then in 2025 to achieve AI breakthroughs, and then in 2030 to be the world leader in AI. So China's really positioned itself to be the tech leaders in the auto payments, the biotechnology, the financial technologies, and AI. So it's important to know like where China has been in that regard in the past. Typically, you used to have for foreign companies to establish in China, they needed to have a joint venture Chinese partner. And this was specifically in certain high technology fields, such as automotive, for example. And this was allowing for Chinese companies, for foreign companies to enter the market, as well as for Chinese companies to learn the know-how and grow. So you have some of these initial automotive companies that came in, established joint ventures, and were really kind of leading that technology drive for China. Now you have these same automotive companies that are competing with local Chinese companies that are leading the way as far as electronic buses, electronic cars, and so forth. Another example would be in Chongqing, for example. You had a lot of foreign companies that went in and took the computer industry from producing 0 laptops and computers to 1/3 of the laptop and computer market in 6 years. You look at that today, and now you have Chinese companies that are innovating and that are producing their own electronic PCs, laptops, and other devices for not only global export, but for the local Chinese market. Again, if you look at some of the other technologies of companies that are based in South China, you have WeChat, for example, which was largely considered an initial replica of other social media platforms in the US, which has now evolved into a complete super app, Swiss Army knife of different features that a person can use on a day-to-day basis. So everything from chatting to calling, ordering food, booking tickets, and so forth. So we see that transition has happened, and we continue to see this in South China.
Well, perhaps we can look at a little bit at the past and then pointing into the future. Now, Dr. Kai-Fu Lee also talked about the important role of supportive government policy. And Joe, you talked about the 14th five-year plan. Perhaps both Jeongmin and Joe, you can put this in context for us. How is the government supporting the entrepreneurs? Because Kai-Fu also talked about this large pool of entrepreneurs that are now in China. They're very active, they're innovative, they can raise money. So what else can you share with us about the importance of going forward with perhaps government policy? Jeongmin, you first.
Yeah, so government can be helpful by thinking about where to intervene and where not to intervene, right? So especially the first wave of Chinese innovation, that was possible because there were lots and lots of white spaces for Chinese entrepreneurs and innovators to do whatever they want to do, right? So there was almost vacuum of the clear policy. Therefore, whether it was e-commerce or mobile payment, right? So there has been lots and lots of experimentation, right? And then when the scale became big enough, then government start intervening and supervising and put some framework to monitor and supervise the progress, right? So that's one role, right? So by creating lots and lots of white space, right? And then second role is by creating market, right? So when there is uncertainty, right, in the future, especially for new types of technology, if government can commit to create a market, right, by becoming a big customer or funding the fundamental research, then that creates an incentive for companies to make a long-term bet, right, in terms of their innovation and R&D drive, and that happens in AI. In many AI applications, government can also become a big customer, right, and that encourage the investment from the companies. And then also in case of high-speed rail, the 90% of the global growth came from China, right? So that's how the local players were able to make a big bet on that one. And if you look at electric vehicle, because of policy, because of subsidy, again, there was a big market. So Chinese local EV players, they were able to catch up and then make a big investment. So second way of helping the innovation is by creating the big market and promoting the R&D investment.
Joe, perhaps you can share a perspective with us from Guangdong. How helpful is the provincial governments?
I would say very helpful. I mean, I think from the beginning, when you had each district, each city was very hungry for investment, not only from foreign investment, but also supporting the local Chinese companies to succeed. Again, I think that the transformation has been very dramatic. If you were just to look at China in the last 40 years, in the video they showed Deng Xiaoping and his famous trip to down south, where he was, I guess, supporting this new open economy. And so if you look at just over this last periods of the Guangdong area, it's gone from the low-end manufacturing to high-end manufacturing to the shift to tech. So I think if you look at China from like the poverty standpoint, in 1978, 90% were below the poverty line. And in 2014, 99% were above the poverty line. So just if you look at the shift of capital that has gone into the general population, that shift has also gone into businesses and entrepreneurs. I think it was the study that in 2017, PwC mentioned that China was creating 2 billionaires per week. And if you look at the new numbers that just came out this last week by Forbes, that has increased almost by half during the last 3 years. So the amount of wealth that has gone into the individual people and middle class has also been transferred into businesses. China has always had the goal of being, I guess, the first at many things. So the goal to be a #1 manufacturing hub, a goal to then be poverty levels. And then now we have the goals of being a leader in AI and in research and development. In the Greater Bay Area, you have a structure where that now you can get to any of the major cities within an hour of time. And the only way that you could do this is by the large governmental project in support of the Greater Bay Area as a logistics hub. Fast speed trains, buses, metro systems that will connect cities that are connecting and bordering. So even just that infrastructure ability to travel from a morning meeting in Hong Kong to a lunch in Shenzhen to a dinner in Guangzhou is feasible only by this infrastructure that has been placed and the support of the local governments. And so the Greater Bay Area still has a huge potential, and as does the entirety of China. And this is, I guess, a good thing going forward for this area and China as a whole.
Right. So, Joe, you've emphasized having very good physical infrastructure that really helps to move people and goods around. Jeongmin, maybe I can come back to you because you've done, McKinsey, you've done tremendous forward-looking work on the workforce itself. In the earlier talk by Kai-Fu Lee, he talked about how automation is going to displace workers. Automation is, of course, also one way of having fewer workers because of China's demographic shift. But in your report, you talked about, well, actually, the Chinese workforce can benefit very greatly in many other ways as well to be upgraded. Perhaps you can share that perspective with us.
Yeah, so it works on both ends. On the one hand, there will be a huge shock in terms of labor market. On the other hand, if you manage that transition very well, there could be a big productivity boost as well. So because of AI and digitization, right? So in case of high adoption scenario, we think that by 2030, perhaps 220 million Chinese workers may need to change their occupation. So which is about 30% of the entire workforce, which is a big deal, right? So therefore, there needs to be a massive redeployment of these workers, and in short, China needs to build a society for lifelong learning, and because the demand on skills will dramatically change. For example, this repetitive, physical manual skills demand will decline by 18%, whereas social and emotional skills or technological skills, the demand will increase by 20 to 50%, right? And then also for certain types of the workers, for example, if it's frontier innovators, their demand will rise by 46%, skilled professionals by 28%, whereas the manufacturing workers or agricultural workers, the demand is likely to fall by 27, 28%, right? So therefore, how do you manage this labor market transition will be a very critical task that China needs to do in order to continue to benefit from Chinese innovation and also productivity-driven growth.
Right. We have some questions now coming in from Slido, so I encourage the audience to keep asking questions. But Jeongmin, maybe I can just come back to you. Now, you mentioned earlier on that the Chinese government is aware of, obviously, this demographic transition that is happening, and it does want to raise the productivity of the workforce. What kind of policies do you think they'll put in place?
So first of all, there's a very big funding to support this lifelong learning. So the central government and also local government, they allocated some tax benefit or subsidies to encourage companies to provide more the workforce training programs, right? But then, we need to think beyond the policy, right? So, our view is that the role of employers will matter a lot, right? So, of course, educators can play a very critical role, but then, upon the graduation of school system, there is 40, 50 years of working life that, each of us need to go through. Therefore, employer can also become a very important educator in that sense, right? So therefore, we think that there could be greater collaboration between schools and industries and local government, and also at the same time, the adoption of digital technologies, right? So whether adopting AI, machine learning, or gamification to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of the training program, or all this, MOOC and podcast and digital platform to dramatically reach the fragmented audience. All of those can contribute to the upgrade of the workforce in China as well as the world.
Joe, perhaps I can come to you and ask a similar question. I mean, on the ground, employers in southern China, you have a very young population in Shenzhen, and do you see that there is a crunch for hiring people, and are you confident that the government doing its part in improving the talent pool, but also what Jeongmin talked about, how will business working together with government to improve the workforce in the longer term?
I think it's largely dependent on the industry and the area. For example, even in our particular area, I'm actually located a bit outside of Guangzhou in a small city, Kaiping. What we are in an industrial zone where it was traditionally very easy to find, I guess, manufacturing workers. There was an abundance at every level and people willing to take these jobs. Within this shift of the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen that it's more and more difficult to obtain these lower end skilled workers in the manufacturing zone. And I think that this is not only specific to this area, but in a larger China setting as well. So you're seeing people that are no longer willing to take these low end jobs that were traditionally filled by people coming from second and third tier cities to the industrial zones. This can be largely be because of the increase in wealth, the opportunities. The younger people are no longer willing to do these labor-intensive jobs. Education has been increasing and so forth. Also, there's the need for, or the shift from these high-intensive workers that required a lot of on-the-ground work to even for low-end manufacturing processes where they're highly automated and using more and more machines to eliminate a lot of these jobs. So for the manufacturing sector, I think that there's a challenge in finding people. But again, this is something that I think is a natural progression with the economy in China as itself. As far as from like the services area and the cities, I think that there's a large educated talent pool We're seeing a lot of the foreign companies that traditionally would hire foreign employees to fulfill senior roles or different areas are now able to find somebody that is equally qualified, if not more qualified, that's locally Chinese, educated outside, and can fulfill those roles in a successful and even oftentimes more efficient and more cost-effective area for the company. So I think that for the labor in China, that there's a lot of opportunities for people to increase. But again, I think with the lifelong learning that Jeong mentioned, this is going to be imperative moving China forward.
Well, I'd like to just ask a question before opening up to the questions that are coming in about the consuming end, the services end, because you both mentioned manufacturing and how that's getting harder because there are other opportunities for young people coming from outside the province. But in terms of just filling the jobs of the growing service sector, the consumer sector, Joe, you said that actually there's lots of people who are quite well qualified. Jeongmin, maybe from your research, this growing market, what is the kind of training that is needed to fit the future consumer economy?
So, first of all, right? So, the future economy, there's huge growth opportunity because, China has the scale advantage, right? So there's no niche market in China. Any market is big, right? So therefore, there is a very big opportunity. And then, if you think about service sector, there will be different types of services, right? So on the one hand, it is more frontline services, right? Where you have the house, you need workers for household the jobs, right? Or the healthcare job or massage, right? So where the physical skills still matters. On the other hand, there is a modern services, advanced services like law, engineering, the finance, including consulting as well, right? So so there will be a lot of different segments coming from that consumer and services sector, right? So therefore, if it's more for high-end service sectors, probably more about critical thinking, negotiation, consultation, technical skills, how to drive the insights out of the lots and lots of data. Whereas for the mid and services job, it is more about providing this the skilled apprentice, right? So that they can become an expert of a specific field, right? So therefore there's no one size fits all, right? So depending on the industry and market demand, there will need to be different types of training needed.
Right, now, I have some questions here, which kind of relates a little bit to this. How do you see the technical innovation in manufacturing? Does it mitigate or aggravate the regional disparity of economic development between the southern and coastal area and inland in China? I mean, obviously, in the 14th five-year plan, Joe, as you mentioned, the government wants more development in other provinces in China. Is everybody going to be still running to the coastal area and to the richer areas, or do you see that more investments, more opportunities are coming to the other parts of China too? Joe, would you like to go first, and then Jeongmin?
Yeah, I mean, I think that every year the AmCham releases a special report where we kind of take a gauge of American companies that are operating in South China. And so the numbers have increasingly shown that China still remains as a top investment destination despite a decreased attraction for manufacturing. So it's clear that our companies here are still not willing to leave completely for China, but mainly shifting for manufacturing to service the local market as opposed for export. And so it's always the China +1+2 strategy. As far as for the higher end, high-tech manufacturing, where it's more automated and they're a higher level of manufacturing, I think that this is still highly encouraged And there's still a lot of industrial parks that are providing incentives for both local and foreign companies that want to operate in this higher end or higher level of manufacturing. So there's kind of a discouragement of the low end, dirty manufacturing, if you will, to a shift to high tech, automated, and more of the, I guess, sexier manufacturing, if you will. That being said, in a lot of the industrial zones that were originally, for the purposes of industrial output, have now become larger cities within themselves. So you have what was once a barren factory land has sprung up very beautiful highways, very beautiful downtown, and all of these real estate investments. So you're seeing a lot of these factory zones with very valuable property being shifted out to farther areas, whether it be Western China or farther out within the cities. So I think that there will be a continuation of manufacturing more for high-end and specific industrial zones, and the lower-end manufacturing will eventually be phased out. And I think a lot of this is because of the difficulty for finding low-end workers, the labor cost increase of having those workers, and then material costs for generally lower-end manufacturing have also increased. So a lot of people will reassess the low-end manufacturing unless it's specifically for the Chinese market.
Jeongmin,
so first of all, there's a so-called superstar effect, right? So which is, if you look at entertainment industry, right? So the popular ones, the top ones, they take a huge share of income out of the total industry. And you see that in the corporate sector as well as cities, right? And the big cities are becoming bigger. Same thing for China, right? So-called these, super, mega cities and clusters, they have been becoming bigger, right? And therefore, how to address that is a big topic. So if you look at 13th five-year plan and 14th five-year plan, government has defined, 19 different city clusters, and they want to, promote, broader development of the nation, and therefore they also say, 8 vertical and 8 horizon, right? So using high-speed rail and highways and connect all these, different clusters, and then each cluster has different endowment, right? So therefore, we'll see, more diverging, path of development by each cluster, right? So there's no, clear answer, hey, from east to west, but, depending on each cluster's, characteristics, some clusters may double down on, ecological development or tourism development. Other clusters will double down on more, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing development and so on. And we are likely to see that kind of, cluster-driven, development across China.
Thank you. Well, I have another question here, which I think both of you can contribute to. It's really a question about what your thoughts are for China's due circulation. This is very much now in the 14th five-year plan. And do you think this is something substantial? And do you think that will impact on US-China relations? Jeongmin, maybe we start with you first this time.
Yeah, so it is the continuation of a lot of the themes, right? So that China has been taking. So in terms of domestic circulation, that means the consumption within China, right? And in fact, China is not that trade dependent, right? So about 60-70% of GDP growth is coming from domestic consumption, and in that sense, that has been happening. And then, as middle class rise in China, they will consume more, the incomes will rise and so on. Therefore, it will continue to be an important engine, right? So in terms of this international circulation, external circulation, the technology matters, right? Technology flow matters, right? So therefore, that the international circulation matters. If you look at the China's the IP, right? So China is the #1, patent holder in the world. But then if you look at the high quality patents, still, China is dependent on the foreign inflow. China's IP import is 5 times greater than IP export. And if you look at core components of robotics or electric vehicle, they are still coming from the foreign players. Therefore, ensuring that international, flow also matters, especially in the context of technology and innovation. So both type of flow will matter to China.
Joe? You have to unmute, Joe.
I think it's definitely a positive, I guess, idea as far as for the internal circulation of China, increasing consumer goods, increasing all of the independence, if you will. But I don't foresee with the interrelations as far as trade, the most important bilateral relationship between the US and China to ever really completely end or close off. I think there's a lot more areas of cooperation and areas that are interdependent on each other than independent. So I think that while it is a long-term goal and strategy, and China is really good at strategy, there will be a continued cooperation. I think within any of these relationships, there's times where they'll have discrepancies, disagreements, but I think there's more areas of cooperation and agreement than there are in these areas of competition. Well, not necessarily competition, but into the conflict of the relationship.
So, I just wondered whether, when you are looking at the dual circulation strategy, is there a kind of national security or self-reliance aspect to it from China's point of view?
I mean, I definitely think so. I mean, I think that there's the view of COVID that has really highlighted this as well. You saw a lot of panic, not only in China, but in the US and other foreign countries that were largely dependent on other countries for their supply chains. And so this was a real awakening for a lot of companies to reevaluate their supply chains. And I think China was no exception to ensure that they were able to have a complete supply chain. You also have the conflicts with the high technology chips and so forth, and technologies that were sometimes used as bartering chips for other areas with the US and China. And so I think China's drive and ambition to really improve and secure and fill the gaps in their supply chain is quite apparent and something that they're really trying to achieve. And not only is that for a national security purpose, but I think also for a long-term competitive stance in the global arena, maybe not necessarily in your developed Western economies, but in other areas that are along the Belt and Road Initiative or in Africa, for example, where they need to increase the supply chain, not only for China, but also for the growth in further global markets that are maybe not a focus to the US potentially.
We have a number of questions of people particularly interested in electric vehicles. I don't know whether either Jeongmin or Joe that this is a question that you're comfortable to speak on. They're interested in your views regarding electric vehicles, the industry in China, and its role and likelihood that it would be a leader in this field. I mean, what we are seeing is actually people are, foreign companies, including Tesla, are making electric vehicles in China today and then exporting them to foreign markets, including the ones in Europe, like in Germany, one of the most technologically advanced vehicle manufacturing country. So how would you like to take that question? Jeongmin, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. First of all, yes, it is an extremely important industry to China, right? So because in the traditional, the internal combustion engine-driven automotive sector, China has been struggling to catch up, right? So China wanted to grow its indigenous brands and the OEMs, and there are lots of them, but then still, large majority, probably 60-70% of the market share were taken by the joint venture, right, or the foreign brands. And then what EV offers is the change in terms of rules of game, right? So therefore, Chinese policymakers and executives think that it's a great opportunity to catch up and then reset the rule, right? So for that matter, it is very critical. And then from the citizens' perspective, right? So as middle classes are rising, the sustainability matters, right? So people worry about the air quality and the environment and so on, right? And then in that sense, right? So there is a very strong push toward more, renewable energy and environment-friendly solution, and EV is one of them, right? So in Beijing or Shanghai, in these big cities, it is extremely difficult to get a normal license plate, right, for the traditional vehicles. So you have to buy EV, right, or these renewable vehicles in order to get a license plate, right? So therefore, from consumer perspective, there is a big benefit, right? So going forward, so it is likely, there is a very big chance that China will continue to make a big investment in growing the industry and infrastructure. So we'll see more and more EV-driven innovation out of China.
Right, Joe, you have BYD in Guangdong and a number of other electric vehicle companies. Your thoughts on this, the industry itself?
Yeah, it's very clear that this is a very ambitious green program that China is implementing. And even in Shenzhen, I think all of the buses are now electronic buses. They have BYD and other companies that are test running complete small cities on fully automated electric cars. You have self-driving electric cars that are operating on a test basis in certain tier 1 cities as well. So it's definitely a focus. We're seeing more and more of it. Not only that, but the infrastructure that supports all of the electronic cars, electronic vehicles is in place now and developing. So I definitely think that for China, this is one of the areas that they see that they can take a leading role, not only within their own cities and counties and districts, but also potentially for export as well.
Right, and Jeongmin, you mentioned the environment. We have a question here that touches on the environment, and maybe you could we will take the question very broadly, because China's environment is still far from desirable. China has many policies. It wants to decarbonize. It's declared that it would be carbon neutral by 2060, which is a complete revolution. And I think part of all of these questions and technologies going forward will play into the future of energy as well as the environment. What are your thoughts? You're both living in China at the moment. Is the level of pollution bearable for you? And are you seeing from year to year advances in improvements? Jeongmin, up in Shanghai, what is it like?
Yeah, so I personally see the gradual improvement, right? So a few years back, there are some horrible news about some the young girl getting a lung cancer, et cetera, right? But then I think that it is gradually getting better, right? But then again, this is related to social stability of China, right? So middle classes are rising, and they have access to all these great digital technologies, right? So and for a while, the first thing that I did when I wake up in the morning was to check the air quality from the app, right? So there is an increasing awareness, right, from the citizens, and therefore government has to respond to this, right? So and to your point, Christine, there is a very big ambition, reaching carbon peak by 2030 and carbon neutral by 2060. And we are having this discussion with many of the other the corporates in China as well, right? So what kind of tools and levers and technologies should we use, right, to actually reduce the carbon emission, right, across many different sectors? And there is also increasing a number of policy to facilitate the transition and enforce the transition. And some of the other companies in China, they see the rising cost, right, to deal with this environment, right? So therefore, so the change and discussion, what is happening in China is real, and there's likely to be a lot more debate on this topic.
Joe?
I think social stability is the key to the overall environment and the improvement from the government and from the country as a whole. As people increase in their wealth, they want clean water, they want clean air. I think even on a day-to-day basis, and from the time I arrived in Guangzhou till now, there's been a significant and noticeable improvement. One of that reason was due to the Asian Games. There was a lot of movement as far as from the factories were moved farther outside. They were given limited production days and so forth. So I think in your first tier cities, you're seeing an obvious improvement in environmental. If that China's a large country, and I'm sure that there's other areas that may not be seeing those immediate benefits and effect, but are still in line with the overall goals of improvement. As far as from a business standpoint, I think sustainability and the importance of environment in corporate governance and in day-to-day actions is becoming more and more key, not only for, I think initially foreign companies kind of took the lead on that role, but you're seeing more and more local companies embrace that way of thinking as well, to where it's not a matter of having sustainability here and profitability here, but putting those goals together and moving forward to increase sustainability and profit at the same time for businesses.
Well, maybe I can ask a last question. China is kind of running forward, and all the things that we've talked about, all the things that you've shared with us, it's about a country having new rules and regulations, new ideas all the time to cope with this very fast-paced growth. But when you're a business on the ground, what is it like, Joe, to kind of cope with all the changes? You're doing business in a constantly changing environment. What is it that companies and business entrepreneurs need to do to kind of just keep up in China?
It's a very good opportunity for a service provider. We are well informed. I mean, I think that we have advisors in every field because it's constantly changing and constantly new rules, new regulations, new incentives that we could take advantage of, as well as you need to be aware of the changes from a negative aspect as well. So I think it's a dynamic environment, and there's a lot of opportunity. But at the same time, there's restrictions that you need to adhere to. We're guests in this country, and to operate efficiently, we need to be compliant and up to date. So things are constantly changing. And so I think that you need to just stay abreast on current information, regulations, and understand that what is happening today can definitely change tomorrow. And so you need to hedge your bets and your strategy and be ready for change. Because it's not going to be, a status quo going forward for years and years. And so it's difficult to have a long-term strategy, but at the same time, you have a long-term vision and then just deal with those issues as they come along.
Right, Jeongmin, you kind of do research and look at the longer term. You have the last word.
Yeah, so on that question, right? So for multinational companies, they need to think like a Chinese company, right? So the regulatory environment, market environment are changing rapidly, but then the pitfall of multinational companies, they have to go through strict processes, multiple layers of reporting, etc. So therefore they tend to act very, very late. But then the strength of Chinese companies, it is speed, right? So they keep experimenting and iterating, right? So therefore, for MNCs, how they can operate, in a China speed, right? In a much more agile way. And then for Chinese companies, they need to think about going global, right? Yes, domestic market has been growing very, very rapidly, but the growth is slowing down. And what next, right? So, in terms of going global, where to go next and what kind of competencies and capabilities that they need to build. So that is the next chapter for local Chinese companies.
Thank you. Well, it's impossible for me to justify doing a good summary, but perhaps some of the points that I've picked up. First of all, China is hurtling ahead at a tremendous speed, and you need to be very nimble. You need to have a long-term view, and you need to perhaps network with others to sort of understand what to do on a day-to-day basis. And why is China surging ahead at this kind of speed? It's important to create jobs increasing income for the Chinese people. Development is very important, and the pathway is going to be through innovation. China will rely more on maybe a domestic economy. Self-reliance is important. And I guess from my point of view, this notion of self-reliance dovetails well with a part of the Chinese, perhaps DNA, that they must feel secure in how they develop. But China has some real strengths, and we heard about that. We also heard about the very innovative and large pool of private entrepreneurs today, but China has some gaps. There are areas where China, the US is leading, and these are areas in hard science and engineering where China is catching up on. So I think I will end here, and I'm going to hand back to Terry Kramer, who's going to round up day one for us. Terry, over to you.
Christine, a big thank you. And let me also add my thank you to Jeongmin and Joe, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. And what I liked is you gave us an on-the-ground feel of what the changes are. The whole idea about the pace of change, the whole idea about this planning for change was so fascinating to me. And these areas of investment that you talked about, the areas of investment in transportation, in AI, in workforce development, a very kind of focused view. And you know what was interesting is, listening to this 30 and 40-year plan, Joe, I don't know if you remember, but 2 years ago when we were in market and you spoke to my global immersion students, I remember you talking about the role of government and business and kind of having a plan and the ability to execute on it. This is a very kind of unique view, I think, because in the US, you wouldn't see, I don't think, a formal 30 or 40-year plan with teeth, with resources and execution. It would be done in a very different way. So I want to thank you for that. And Jeongmin, also, I want to thank you. I've thought about a lot of the work that you and your colleagues have done on superstar cities, superstar firms. I'm trying to remember the exact name, but it's a very fascinating way of looking about where you make investments and where you get great outcomes. So terrific messages there. So let me thank the three of you for doing all of that, and obviously for Kai-Fu Lee for really opening our eyes to the power of data, the power of artificial intelligence, the idea of multi-sectored innovation, and all of the changes that come with that, good and bad. Good in terms of improved outcomes in healthcare and education, and externalities that can be negative about how do you think about the future of work? How do you think about how you manage data? How do you think about antitrust? So I think this has been, between the two sessions, a great example about the theme here, about the role of technology transforming the lives of consumers, enterprises, and society. So let me just say a big thank you, obviously, to three of you and to all of you for your participation. Tomorrow we will start again at 5 p.m. We're going to do a whole review on internet services, on education, and I hope you'll join us tomorrow and the rest of the week.